So why have we seen such a massive increase, what seems like one, in shootings like this? Tom Kirsting is a psychotherapist and school counselor. Judge Alex Farrar is a former Miami-Dade County judge, and they both join us tonight. Judge, to you first, we're going to find out a lot more in this specific case because unusually the shooter is still alive. But more broadly, we have seen, in absolute terms, a pretty big spike in shootings like this. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it'd be very difficult to just go ahead and jump into the mind of these shooters and come up with a very simple explanation for why they're behaving that way. Clearly, society has changed in its relationship with violence. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, there was nowhere near the level of violence we have today. We certainly had guns back then, but we didn't have the level of violence we have today. So I think in some ways, society has become very desensitized to violence. And I did see back then as a police officer, parents taking a much more key role in educating their kids about right and wrong. We seem to have lost that line of distinction between right and wrong. Not to say that that clearly applies to this case, because nobody would ever think that it's right to do this horrific act. But I think, like Mayor Giuliani discussed, it's the little things that lead to the big things. And as a judge, I used to tell the parents who come in my courtroom, you could either discipline your child now, or somebody like me is going to be disciplining them much later. And that discipline is going to be a lot harder to deal with because it is a rolling stone. And once it starts moving, you know, culture does change. And we see culture now being very violent, very, I would say, desensitized to it, where it doesn't faze them anymore.
Clearly. I mean, Tom, guns are not magic. They're tools. They don't operate themselves. Attitudes are what matter, and attitudes have changed. How have they changed, do you think?
Well, here's what I think, Tucker, right? So the society we live in is not the society I lived in growing up as a kid. This generation is being raised by social media and smartphones, and they're not spending enough time part of the family dynamic. And the kind of content, we see it. I mean, if you go on social media, whether it's just, you know, the hatred from, you know, people's views and so forth, we see this anger and this hatred that's occurring, that's getting into people's minds. That takes somebody who's mentally ill, like the shooter, okay? Imagine him absorbing hours and hours a day of video content, which is what I would presume he did, and I think we're going to see that. I really believe that. And imagine what that's doing to his mind, all right? Our actions as human beings are a reflection of what's spinning around upstairs in our minds. So we've got to get back to the basics of families. Parents need to sit down with their kids every night, get back to the dinner table, and have what the president said today, deep, meaningful interactions with one another.
I think that sounds right. Judge, why isn't there a national conversation about this? It seems like something that's important, and it's an obvious problem, and people feel like there's something deeply wrong with the culture that would produce something like this, but there isn't a conversation about it. Why?
I don't think it's something you can control. I think it's a lot harder to get people to change the way they're living their lives than it is to say, you know, if we just banned this type of gun, this problem would go away. And the reality is that if somebody is a homicidal maniac, if somebody is, and I completely agree with the doctor, that the sentiment out there gets created, especially in social media where there's so much hatred in today's day and age, it becomes a triggering effect. At some point, somebody snaps. So if somebody snaps and they want to kill a lot of children because they think, you know what, I'm going to become infamous, you don't need a gun to do that. Just sitting here talking to you, I can think of 3 ways right now that I could kill a lot of children if I was a homicidal maniac, and none of them would involve guns. So it's an easy answer. It's easy to say, let's ban guns and we've solved the problem, or let's ban this type of gun, because I don't think the U.S. will ever, having been founded with the Wild West, having been founded with guns, would ever get rid of all their guns. It's easy to say that. It's a lot harder to get people to change their behavior and the way that they are raising their children, and especially the way society's been kind of moving away from religion, which, like it or not, did set moral parameters for people and teach right and wrong. The other answer is a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree with that. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you.
The Parkland shooting appears to have happened despite some advance warning. It turns out 5 months ago, the FBI